Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. This month I'm doing the Mermay Challenge, where I'm going to draw a mermaid every day for the month. Engage speed paint. Getting abducted by aliens is less fun than it sounds, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Zebra Angelfish III had a bright and promising future. She grew up in a middle-class family on the seafloor, got good grades, and was a bit of a financial prodigy. She was a bit of a loner, but that was sort of common for angelfish. When she was younger, this presented in her being overly jumpy and quick to apologize. Around late high school and early college, this presented more in an aloof personality that was very results-driven, with no time for a thriving social life. She only really talked to her roommate and her professors. The majority of these conversations, Z was telling someone off for doing something wrong. And she had only ever given praise to herself and her parents. Z herself rarely ever slipped up in anything. One day she was sitting in the common room of the apartment intensely studying her homework when her roommate charged through the door carrying some sort of bundle. She didn't greet Z, she just opened the latch for the attic and threw what was apparently a human man up there. The attic was a mandatory air room for marine mammals such as dolphins and whales. Z's roommate, Dragonet, brushed off her hands and sighed with relief. Yeah, don't go up there. You got a pet? You can't get a pet. Our rental agreement doesn't allow for pets, Z responded. It's not a pet, it's a service animal. What? Am I supposed to talk about my feelings with you? Z groaned and put her head back. We both know that I'm the one who's going to end up taking care of it. No, you won't. I'll give you my word. Z ended up being the one who had to take care of it. It started out well because Dragonet initially was the one who went to the store to buy toys and charms to prevent hypothermia, and a bunch of other things. However, the human clearly didn't want to be there and would scream and cry at all hours during those first few days. In his point of view, he was commanding and threatening them to release him, which was probably more accurate. The end result was that he wouldn't love or listen to Dragonet, and so she lost interest. Therefore, caring for him was Z's responsibility. Around the third night, he broke the door of the attic and began swimming around the house, breaking things. Z and Dragonet got into a heated argument. Dragonet wouldn't see reason, and so Z put a bubble collar on the human and took him for a walk so that both he and Z could calm down. The collar was infused with magical microscopic diamonds, which provided air to whatever was wearing it. There was also bubble necklaces, but the difference with the collar was that if you got far enough away from the mer person who owned the collar, then the air would cut off. Z was naturally a slow swimmer, but the human still had trouble keeping up with her. This was the first time he had realized how deep underwater they were, and how he had no hope of swimming up to the surface on his own. They reached a nearby park, and Z let him stop for a moment. She muttered to herself about her roommate's terrible decisions and attitude while the human caught his breath. Look, he said muffled through the bubble. I don't want to be here. You and what's-her-face don't want me here either. How about you Siren song doesn't make you do things that you don't want to do. It's basically a catchy jingle like what vendors do to sell random junk you don't need. He went quiet. She looked him dead in the eye. It's your own fault that you're here. The human looked so very sad. Z turned and began swimming home at a much brisker pace. Human scrambled to keep up with her and in a desperate burst of adrenaline grabbed her arm. He sort of expected her to shake him off or stop, but she just slowed down slightly, pulling him along with her. His muscles were sore by the time they made it back to the house, and Z had to heft him into the attic herself. The human wasn't sure if she was a potential friend or an enemy at this point. Z had made a mistake the night before. She hadn't taken off the bubble collar, and so the human followed her to school. She didn't notice until she was literally at the literal door to the campus and something began frantically thrashing around in the kelp. She just had this feeling that she should check it out, and lo and behold, the human had gotten tangled up in the seaweed and was having a panic attack that she would swim out of range and drown him. Z had this stray thought that it was probably really hard on him to be in constant fear of dying. However, he was the one who had decided to follow her, despite knowing he really couldn't keep up, and to hide in the kelp in the first place. So she didn't pity him for long. She pulled him out and brought him to class, because she didn't want to waste time bringing him home and ultimately showing up late. The world might actually end if she was late to anything. As is, her professor cracked a joke about her being 30 seconds early instead of her usual 10 to 15 minutes. Z forced a smile. Mr. Octopus quickly moved on to gushing over the human because apparently he was something of an expert on them. This specific one was a quality human, like a prince or something. The human began rambling something about offering more information on the human realm in exchange for Mr. Octopus bringing him to the surface, when the professor turned off his air bubble to temporarily shut him up. The air reformed into a new bubble in 10 seconds, but the human choked on the water a bit from the shock. Mr. Octopus explained that they should talk more after class and diverted his attention back to the lecture. Z half-heartedly patted the human on the back before taking her seat. The human disgruntledly sat beside her. He picked up her book bag off the ground so that he would actually stay on the chair because he kept floating when he wasn't actively swimming. Z tuned him out and became engulfed in the lecture. The human also listened a bit, but people kept staring at him. He was also trying to figure out how to convince Z or someone to take him back home, or potentially find or create some sort of device to get to the surface himself. After the lecture, Mr. Octopus approached them. Z subtly started to dig her fingernails into the side of her tail, thinking about how long this would take, and if she could make it on time to the next class. And if that would cause a ripple effect that would cause her not to have enough time for homework, and that would make her grades take a dip, and that would make her fail her classes, that would let everyone down, and then they would make fun of her for not being as infallible as she said she was. Meanwhile, the professor asked if he could touch the human's knees to figure out how the joint moved. The human rejected this request, but did allow the merman to touch his cybernetic eye. "You really need to train him more," Mr. Octopus said to Z. "Huh? Really not with it today, are we, Miss Angelfish? I was saying you need to pop the bubble when the human is being chatty more often, so that he gets desensitized to it. I can recommend a trainer." "Wait, trainer?" the human asked, concerned. Z nodded. "Yeah, we probably need that." He gave her the trainer's whispering pearl, basically a business card. Dragonet hadn't been happy about Z stealing her pet human for the day, but was happy about getting the name of that trainer. That weekend, Z stayed home to clean the apartment, while Dragonet took the human to Wells Catfish for training. The human did not want to go and tried to stay up in the attic. They just flooded the room, and it was so much easier to drag him along than... The human asked Dragonet a couple times to let him go home, but she just ignored him and started rambling about random people in her life she didn't like. He passively took in the information, but didn't show any indication that he was actually listening. Wells was surprisingly a nice enough guy. He spoke kindly, if not a bit condescendingly, to the human, and didn't try to touch him. Very low bar. The human wasn't in an especially talkative mood that day, but he toned himself down to meet Mr. Catfish's energy. Dragonet, on the other hand, saw someone a bit quieter and more introverted than herself, and used the opportunity to be even louder than usual. Catfish had a respirator so the salt water would dilute before he inhaled it. Half of his house was full of air and had above-water plants. The whole location was a bit closer to the surface and filled with natural light from plexiglass skylights. There were different rooms that had fresh water in them, and Wells was very proud about making the house and all the different sections himself. He also did his own gardening, which was incredibly difficult in this environment. Wells had 2 pet humans. One was a man who cleaned the house and maintained the differing water salinities, pruning dead leaves off of the above and below water plants, and organizing the books. He always felt the need to be doing something. The other was a woman who sat in the farthest corner of the air section muttering to herself and barely acknowledging anyone's presence except Wells, who she forced interest and politeness for. The human man had been underwater his whole life. Wells had adopted him from an animal shelter. The woman had been tossed off of a boat and had later been adopted. However, later the city guard had confiscated her and given her to Wells because she had been mistreated in some way. Wells said it was because her previous family couldn't afford clean fresh water. It was unclear if that was the full extent of it or not. Dragonet left her human, who she officially named Human, there for the day so that she could go shopping. Wells let Human hang out with his own human named Fido for half the day. Fido had this passive-aggressive waiter vibe, but he still taught Human techniques about how to hold his breath for longer. He taught him about the collars and let slip that there was a necklace variation, but it was nearly impossible to get a hold of. The remainder of the time, Human spent with Wells. Wells' version of training was basically like being a politician or like people who wanted to use Human's prince titles to have favors done. Wells was manipulative and friendly, and tried to convince Human that it was better down here and to forget his life from before. Without thinking too hard about it, Human politely rejected this like he was talking to a member of the press who was trying to get him to admit something embarrassing. Out of the corner of his eye, Human could see the woman cringe. For the rest of the session, Human spent time in some sort of reverse fish tank, which was full of air and held underwater. It was basically about the size of a coffin. Wells said that he could come out when he calmed down, but Human didn't calm down. When Dragonet came back, they let him out, and he lunged at Dragonet and put her into a headlock. He demanded that she take him back to the surface. He was angry and threatening things he didn't know if he'd be able to follow through on, but the panic was making him not really care. He just needed out of here by any means necessary. Dragonet began singing, and all of Human's anger disappeared. He couldn't think. He was seeing blurs of color, but he didn't know what he was looking at. He couldn't feel his body, and the only thing in existence was the song. Suddenly it stopped, and Human jolted back to himself, and he was back in the box. That wasn't just a catchy jingle like Z had said earlier. He couldn't hear this, but outside of the box, Wells promised not to tell the city guard about this in exchange for Dragonet getting a discount. Dragonet tied up the tank with Human in it, and she brought the whole thing back to the apartment. She tossed all of her bags full of new clothes on the floor of the common area, asserted that the training was going great, and then left to go to bed. Z let the Human out. "Look, I really messed up here," Z said. "I thought that this was more of an orientation-type training than whatever this is. You didn't deserve to be trapped like that, I'm sorry." He silently took off his collar, gave it to her, and then swam up to his attic. Z had done a good job drying it out, and the bundle of fabric that he'd been using as a bed was warm. He slept surprisingly well that night, even though he didn't feel safe at all. Apparently, all of the shopping had been because Dragonet was planning a party for the next day, which she hadn't informed Z about. pool. More and more people started coming in, and Z went up to the attic so that she could do her homework in peace and quiet. Human hadn't left his bed all day. He barely acknowledged her when she came in. "Can I do my homework in here?" he asked. "Well, it is your house," he responded dryly. She looked him over and he gave her nothing, and so she shrugged and pulled herself over to the corner and began reading. The mermaid alphabet was comprised of a series of flashing bioluminescent lights, which was recorded on a shell. "So, you can handle being in air?" Human asked. Z glared at him for a moment and then sighed. "Yes, I can. I don't need air. It feels weird. I can be above water." "Ah." They sat in silence for a moment. "Why did you lie to me about the siren song?" Z laughed harshly. "Oh, I don't lie." Human started to say something else when Dragonet called him. He flinched. "Come on and get down here, or I'll flood the room again," Dragonet called playfully. "Please don't make me go down there," Human whispered to Z. "Collar's by a hook on the door. The tank is up right where you left it. I'll have to report her to the superintendent because draining the air room when there are dolphin merpeople on the premises is a safety violation. Yet another thing I'm gonna have to do today." Z took some more notes. The water began filling up, and Human jumped down into the water. Someone grabbed his arm before he could go into the tank. He froze, but whoever it was slipped a necklace over his head. The air bubble formed almost instantly. His vision cleared, and he saw a mackerel mermaid girl smiling at him. He instinctively gave a nervous smile back. She patted his shoulder. "Yeah, that should feel better, right? That's one of the ones that doesn't have a set radius." Human tried his best not to cry. "I still think this is a bad idea," Dragonet muttered dramatically. Mackerel waved her off. "Please, my ex-boyfriend was a human. Trust me, he needs this." And everyone spent the rest of the party talking to Human, asking him how he'd lost his eye and what his favorite color was and what it was like living on the surface. He sort of felt like a person again for the first time in a while. That was when he officially decided that he wasn't going to blow up the neighborhood as revenge when he finally got out. As the party was wrapping up, Mackerel suggested that Human come over to stay with her. Human enthusiastically agreed, but Dragonet said no. He didn't know what he was saying, and he wanted to stay there. Dragonet and Human had a bit of a staring competition where they seemed to have a whole conversation with subtle expressions. Finally, Human sighed and agreed to stay there. Mackerel was obviously suspicious of this, but she respected their wishes before leaving. After Human had left the attic for the party, Z got engrossed in her studies, so much so that she forgot to drain the attic. Human was oddly okay with this. After Dragonet went to bed, Human suggested that he and Z take a walk. She looked him dead in the eye. "You're just saying that because you want to make a break for it with your fancy new necklace." "You have a problem with that." Z sighed. "If you really don't want to be here, then you should probably go." "Thank you." Human immediately grabbed the ropes of the tank and headed for the door. However, Human didn't stop. Z gritted her teeth. "However, it's a long way to shore from here. Like a month's swim for a mermaid. Maybe 2-3 months for you. You don't have any money to buy things, and it's very difficult to survive in the wilderness." He completely ignored her and swam down the block. "This is a really bad idea," she called after him. He didn't respond. She had no choice but to follow him. Z led him to a bus stop and promised to go as far as Farfield Island, where he could potentially find a boat to take him to a river near where his kingdom was. Z then needed to go into a monologue about buses and boats because the human, who was actually named Prince Ronald, got confused. Buses were carriages that were strapped to the backs of whales. Boats were submarines, which the merfolk had modified to be full of water. Ones that went to the rivers were usually filled with fresh water. Ronald revealed that he had a couple of gold coins in his boots and refused to let Z pay for his boat ride back to shore. She did convince him to let her pay for the bus. The driver was a middle-aged clownfish lady who was almost done for the day and very tired. It was 11 at night. No one else was on the bus. Z did have midterms in the morning, but was actively trying not to think about that. She tried to distract herself from the overwhelming dread by asking Ronald questions. He had lost his eye in a bandit attack. He was fairly young and privileged in that regard. Ronald's dad, the king, had lost 1.5 legs and his arm over the course of his life. The kingdom was comprised of 10 villages. In contrast, merfolk had kingdoms that comprised of multiple cities and had populations ranging from the 100,000s to millions of citizens. On the surface, it was nearly impossible to grow anything pretty much anywhere. Thus, they ate a lot of meat and dairy products because they still had grass and bugs. Ronald thought bugs weren't really that bad to eat either, to be honest. Z was absolutely disgusted by this. The kingdom had been running since the days of Ronald's grandfather and had middling success at present. However, it was en route to become one of the better established kingdoms. Before the kidnapping, Ronald had been on a trip across the channel to try to get 3 seaside villages and 1 town to join his kingdom, since they had recently staged a revolution to break away from the kingdom that they had previously been a part of, because those seaside towns were producing the majority of the food and revenue for no additional benefit. He'd been taking a walk on the beach after an especially bad negotiation meeting when he heard someone singing and lost all sense of himself. The next thing he knew, he was in Dragonet and Z's attic. Z stared at him pretty intently after he said that. He got sort of awkward. So, why do you lie about the siren song thing? She was quiet for a second. Ronald, what you're accusing Dragonet of doing is highly illegal, and one of the most serious crimes a merperson could commit. What? So there's actually a type of singing that's like jingle level instead of full mind control? I mean, yes. I don't know how to prove that. I don't know how to do either of those things. I'm just commerce tracked. I'm not magically gifted at all. I know how to do a first-degree siren song, the bus driver lady chimed in. Z and Ronald looked at each other. Is that the mind control one or the mostly normal catchy tune one? Ronald asked. Bus driver lady rolled her eyes and began singing an incredibly catchy tune that made them really want to give her a tip. But since neither of them really had the funds to do that, they were able to resist. Ronald blinked. Yeah, that's not what Dragonet was doing. Z sighed. Yeah, we're gonna have to sort this out. Ma'am, do you mind making a detour to the guard station? Are you kidding? This is the most exciting thing that's happened all day! And she pulled on the reins and brought the whale around. Dragonet was woken in the middle of the night by a call from a guard station miles away. Her new human had accidentally turned himself in to the guard, and it seemed like her roommate had stolen him. They didn't know that her dad was running for the mayor of their city, apparently. This sort of controversy was always going to have been swept under the rug. She was almost sorry for them. She went down to the station and picked him up. This clownfish bus driver lady had punched a guard, and both her and Z had managed to escape. However, Human had lost his shiny new necklace in the scuffle and had been forced back into the tank. Dragonet wasn't too worried about it. She bribed one of the guards to help her carry the tank back to her house. Human had his eyes closed most of the trip back. After the guard left, she knocked on the tank until he opened his eyes. He was in Z's bedroom. This was about 2 minutes away from the attic. He didn't think he could hold his breath for 2 minutes. Dragonet smiled at him. Hello, little guy. Are you a bit lost? Yes, you were. Human glared at her. I am not a pet. Dragonet leaned on the tank. Yeah, I know. You're a hostage. Human shifted his weight. That actually makes some degree of sense. But my family doesn't have money. Dragonet laughed. Yeah, right. Let's try, buddy. Human scoffed and put a hand in his pocket. And besides, there's nothing you could do to stop me from trying to escape. Dragonet thought that was sort of an odd thing for him to say, but she ignored that thought and began singing. Human's eyes went all glassy and he began giving her compliments and saying ridiculous things. Too bad he wouldn't remember what he was saying. Oh well. When she stopped singing, Human started breathing heavily. He had that satisfying look of terror in his eyes. She left him there and found a group of guards and Z in the common room? Oh, good, you found her. I don't know why you brought her here. Dragonet trailed off as she noticed that the captain pointedly held up a radio shell. Dragonet put together that Human must have been recording their conversation and the illegal mind control spell. She laughed nervously. I don't know if you know this, fellas, but my dad's running for mayor. Yeah, we know, we're choralists. Dragonet turned to Z. You're a choralist now. Said you were a Shellian. Z shook her head. I said I lean Shellian, but I am a moderate. Besides, helping my friend is more important. Dragonet gritted her teeth. I want it on record that was the lamest thing I've ever heard. Okay, said the captain. She went on to continue reading Dragonet her rights and arrested her. The captain warned that neither Ronald nor Z could leave the city until the trial was completed. After they left, Z went into her room and gave Ronald his necklace back. They both went to bed. Z almost slept through her alarm but was still late to her first class. She was half awake and later found out that she got a 99% on all of her midterms except one where she got a 98%, which meant her life was pretty much over. Ronald had his bubble necklace back and had free reign of the house. He went for a swim and talked to random people on the street. He listened to some audiobooks while he worked on some of the puzzles that Dragonet had bought him. He called Fido and talked to him about the whole situation. Fido got an hour a day where Wells allowed him to call other humans or merpeople. Surprisingly to Ronald, Fido and the humans sort of liked Wells and wanted to be there to an extent, but they were inspired by Ronald's story to start standing up for themselves more. They thought that maybe they could get Wells to pay them, or let them go and find their own jobs so that they could help him out. Ronald was sort of concerned about this because freedom was very important to him, but he was openly very supportive because this seemed like a big step for them. He made some dinner for Z. They had a shortish conversation with each other, but it still felt meaningful. And then they both went to bed early because they were still exhausted from the day and night before. Now, to be completely honest, I had a different draft written of Clownfish, Dragonet, and Patty here, but I didn't like it, and so I rewrote it. I accidentally finished the story in Dragonet section, and so need to incorporate this Perch drawing and personality into the epilogue. Dragonet's trial was moved up for the political importance of it all, but Ronald was still stuck underwater for a few months. He decided to send someone to talk to his family to tell them that he was okay. The city guard couldn't leave their post, and so he needed to choose someone from the private sector. The guy that he chose agreed and took the upfront payment, but got the flu, and so instead he sent his girlfriend. The girlfriend was named Patty, and she was absolutely terrified because she'd never been on a mission on her own before. She'd talked to surface humans before and returned humans back home when their relationships with the merfolk didn't work out. But she'd always had someone else with her. She dropped out of the enchantment tract in her teen years because she couldn't handle the stress. She knew a few legally registered self-defense spells, so wasn't in as much danger as someone else might have been. It was actually a fairly uneventful 3-day trip. She had to buy a saltwater respirator for the submarine and the river, since both the submarine and the river were freshwater. She didn't go far up the river when she found some farmers harvesting scraggly carrots. Patty awkwardly tried to get their attention. They mostly ignored her, but did say that this was the right river for the spawning grounds, and that there was a mer-person-accessible restaurant half a mile upstream. She explained her situation and called Ronald on her shell phone. One of the farmers left to get word to the king that his son was okay. Ronald and the remaining farmers had a conversation. After Ronald explained that he was in fact eating well where he was, one of the farmers suggested that maybe they should try to open up trade with the merpeople. Ronald said he wasn't sure that the Queen of Growadark would spring for that deal. Patty had been sort of quiet this whole time, but chimed in to say that she could probably pull something together to get some sort of trade going. If it was only a few hundred people, then it shouldn't be too hard for a small independent business to supply enough for everyone. Z volunteered to help since she was on the commerce tract. After Patty came back home, she and Z worked out more of their business plan. Mackerel came in as a communications officer and sales lead. Ronald helped them decide the correct types of food that the humans would like the best. Apparently his kingdom had a huge gold mine that was practically useless, since fresh food and water were more valuable, and the inflation was absolutely terrible. After the trial, Ronald did go back home, but he came back regularly to visit Human X Mermaid Inc. And maybe he and Z got married after a few years of this, I don't know. And I think that's it for today. For the writing of these videos, I was practicing writing distinct characters. Since I wrote everything first, hopefully the character designs match what I had in mind. Final script editing past librarian. This was mostly true because I had the first draft done before I changed the last 3 entries. I'll see you when I see you, but hopefully it's next week. Bye!